Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our 2020 FreeBSD Vendor Summit, virtual vendor summit for this year. Today we have a few more talks and another discussion topic similar to yesterday. We're going to start off with a talk from Axiado as our first talk here right after me. After that, we'll have a talk about Simpro from Jonathan Eastgate, and then a talk about Clara. And finally, we'll be closing out today's schedule with a kind of panel discussion with an update from our Git working group, who are working on our kind of pending transition to Git as a project. So let's go ahead and get started for today. So first up, as I mentioned, is Axiado, and Axel's going to be giving that talk. So let me switch over to Axel and get him started. Okay, Axel.
Great, thanks a lot.
Sure.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had enough coffee or whatever the caffeinated drink of choice is. So let's get going. Let me give you a little bit of an input and background into what I'm doing and what Axiado is doing, so you understand why we made the choices that we did, and I'll get to that. So I'm the CTO and founder of a company called Axiado. Axiado is focusing on designing processors that help enable secure the digital infrastructure, not only for the firewalls and routers of this world, but we are going to begin with the operation, administration, maintenance, provisioning part of it, because we believe that at this point in time, that's a much easier way for hackers to infiltrate your infrastructure. And so that's why we are focusing on that first. But a little bit background on what we do. We have developed a processor that is based on RISC-V, which I think is a very novel and interesting processor architecture, but we don't quite trust software to the degree that we think security should be left to software alone. We believe that most of the functions should be done in hardware. And so that's why we put a lot of accelerators into our processor, which really is a system on a chip. And these accelerators make not only the security available, but also make sure that no intruder and hacker can get to any of the real secrets, like keys and some of the things you would usually use for digital wallets. So that's the background behind what we are doing and why we are doing it. And I'm trying to share the screen, which at this point in time doesn't seem to work. Okie dokie. Let me try that again. Okay. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, good. Very good. Okay, as usual, whenever you present something, something tries to hiccup. Okay, so FreeBSD and Axiado, how did that come together? First of all, I've been using FreeBSD for a very long time in companies prior to Axiado, and I've always had very good experience with it, robustness and the speed and performance it delivers. And so therefore, for me, it was a fairly natural choice to use FreeBSD, but of course there had to be more to it, because ultimately, you know, this is not a choice that I make for all of the customers without having a very good background as to why we use it and what its benefits are, because if we impose that on customers, then we have to have a very good reason for doing so. And I'll lay out what that is and why that was. So first of all, we're using FreeBSD internally. So all of our file servers, backup servers, everything else, all of the file services, they are based on FreeBSD. And even our firewall is FreeBSD based. So we're using at this point in time pfSense. And as you all know, that's based on FreeBSD. And we believe that is a choice that gives us the performance we need at the level of security that at this point in time is available to us, because our chips are not out yet. We've had very good experience with it so far. We haven't had anything that crashed. We haven't had anything that would impede on the performance goals we had to support our internal engineering. And all of the file services have worked as expected. And of course, the only troublemakers, of course, were the Windows machines, because ultimately all of those devices we have are the terminal devices, and the engineering workstations are Linux, and a good portion of Windows, and a very few Mac machines. And so we've had diverging views on Windows and FreeBSD, but that may be due to us misconfiguring things. I can go into that later on. For the product use, we use FreeBSD, at least its kernel, because ultimately, because of the accelerators we have in our system on our chip, we don't want to disclose what these accelerators do and how they do it, because that's part of our secret sauce. And so therefore, we couldn't really use a GPL operating system, because that would require us to disclose all of the source code, which then in turn would have allowed customers and competitors to look into how our accelerators work, what they do, and how we integrate that into the system. So that was one of the many reasons that we chose a BSD operating system, because very simply, we can't afford to open source the code that shows the inner workings of our chip. The OS kernel itself is unchanged, of course, compilers and that. I'll come to all of that, but we've had quite a bit of development done because of the fact that we chose to run FreeBSD on a processor that is relatively new, and that's, of course, RISC-V. And at this point in time, we're using it as the embedded operating system in what we call our secure vault, which is the part inside the chip that protects all of the secrets, not only the secret keys, but also everything that you would use in your digital wallet and in all of the applications that require very high levels of security, way past what a firewall usually would allow you to do, and way past the security afforded to all of us by virtualization and containerization of software and applications. We're also using that as an embedded operating system in our secure BMC. We're in the last phase of defining this particular chip. So as you may know, a BMC is a component inside a server that is effectively a PC inside a PC. And this BMC is used to administer the server. And if you look at today's attacks, most of attacks against servers that are successful are going through the BMC and not through the server itself. And so that poses a ginormous problem for all of the users, because while you may be able to secure and button down the server and its operating system reasonably well, the BMC, unfortunately, is a whole lot less secure than you would want it to be. And as a result, we see that there is a huge demand for securing a BMC, and we're going to make sure that that's changed with our secure BMC and FreeBSD as part of the operating system for it. So it's an embedded OS in the secure BMC. And we are doing the same for our secure industrial IoT controller. Again, not the IoT controller that you would find in your Fitbit or in your Nest, but if you think industrial size Nest for not only one room or one house, but an entire office building, you want to make sure that that cannot be penetrated by hackers easily or ideally at all. So that's why we believe the combination with our hardware and the software, or ultimately the FreeBSD OS kernel as a firmware, that is a reasonably secure and high performance solution to make sure that we have all of the features and all of the functions available in a secure IoT controller without compromising security in whatever form or shape. What we found in all of the applications so far where we deployed it is FreeBSD is incredibly stable. And what I personally like about it, because I would like to see things with my own eyes, I rather have a look at the source code for important things that make up the foundation of our products. And if I, as a non-expert in C and C++, can understand how, for example, malloc and free works, then there's a good chance that it's actually stripped down to its core, and simplicity in this case is synonymous with security, because there are simply fewer holes to be found if the source code and therefore the executable is very small. And so that's what I like about it, and that's what we found to be one of the benefits in the solution, and we like that about it. Another thing we really like about it, because we know that because these things are embedded and these things are going to be inside a system for a very long time, we needed to make sure that we can update and upgrade the software and the firmware, and therefore the good package and the update management was a huge distinguishing factor for us to make sure that FreeBSD is one of the solutions we are favoring here at this point in time, because very simply, if a device is in the field for, believe it or not, some of the customers say up to 40 years, well, you know, we need a decent way to update it, and it has to be secure, and it has to be fast and convenient enough for us and for our customers, and ultimately for our customers' customers, to make sure that they stay current on the operating system and its features and functions, and of course its security. And then the last thing with regards to the use in the products that we create is, of course, now that we invested a boatload of money into LLVM and Clang, there's great support for the compiler for FreeBSD on RISC-V. It cost us a pretty penny, but we are very, very confident that the performance goals can be met with the LLVM Clang on our chip. And it seems to work flawlessly, and it seems to do everything it needs to do. And we're very, very happy about that. And as I already pointed out, it's been perfect for our file servers. We've never had a file server go down. We've never had a request for a file go down. We've never lost a file. And you know, we back it up quite a bit. And despite the fact that we are using both RAID, in fact, RAID 6 and ZFS, we haven't had any administrative issues with that. We haven't had any file loss, anything that would be detrimental. And as I said, the performance has been actually better than expected initially. And of course, as I already alluded to it, the license models have to work for for-profit companies, because ultimately a for-profit company has to turn a profit, and we cannot do that if we have to disclose the hardware hooks into the software. And so therefore, the BSD model was absolutely crucial for us to choose FreeBSD, because as I said, we cannot disclose what the software does to trigger the accelerator's actions for all of the accelerators we have in our system on a chip. And so therefore GPL was out, whether GPL 2 or 3 or lesser GPL. We simply couldn't afford to do that because again, we can't and we don't want to disclose the secret sauce in the software that makes use of the secret sauce in our hardware. And so therefore, FreeBSD, I think, is a good choice, was a good choice, and certainly will be continued to be used in our company. Well, as with many products, there are pros and cons. And so the cons are, in this case, if you just use it for embedded systems, which we relegated some portions of it to, then FreeBSD is a bit too big and too clumsy for some of the embedded systems that have to run on very, very limited memory footprints, and with processors that are scaled down in performance and that are not necessarily multi-core and not necessarily capable of larger scale SMP systems. So for those systems, and that's not really a fault and a con of FreeBSD, that was more our fault for not making sure we know what the target market and the technology is. For those systems, FreeBSD is a bit too big and a little bit too clumsy if you really are focused on embedded systems where again, CPU performance and memory footprint is very, very limited. So as I said, particularly the memory footprint turned out to be a little bit bigger than we wanted it to be, because ultimately FreeBSD is a multi-user, multi-threaded system, and in most of those embedded applications that we are now using it, turns out we didn't use and we didn't need multi-user, multi-threaded application and operating system support. That was a fault on our side. So we certainly didn't do the research on the product market fit properly for that kind of application. But now we're there, we've got all the drivers, and so now it works, but in retrospect, the footprint is a bit too big. But again, that's really none of FreeBSD's fault. For the applications in the file server, we noticed that a lot of things can be configured, and you can configure read-write caching, and it actually speeds up things quite substantially. And the funny thing is, it doesn't come pre-configured that way. And so that may be a hint for the developers community. Maybe the software should come in a way, or should have possibly a configuration option that says, here's how you configure it if you have a very large I/O load on the machine, and maybe even that should be something where some self-learning configuration should come into the game, because ultimately the operating system will see how many files are transferred, what the requests are, if the files coming back are usually either large or small or mixed thereof. And so the caching is something where I think an automated setup and automated reconfiguration towards the frequency and the size of the caching and the I/O ops can be optimized so that, in fact, it performs as well as it can, because we see it can perform better than it did out of the box by just tweaking those things. So that may be some food for thought for the developer community, but this is not something where I would say FreeBSD is as a disadvantage. I think, in fact, it still has an advantage over all of the other solutions we tried out. It's just you can configure it to perform vastly better if you know what you're doing with the caching. And so that, again, that may be something that could come out of the box in a little bit more optimized fashion. And the last thing we found out was it really doesn't play well with Active Directory or with Samba or LDAP. Well, at least we couldn't configure it. We couldn't make it work. So it always looks like it works well with Linux. It works well with a Mac. The few Windows PCs we have in the company, they always had issues with either access rights or subfolders not accessible at all, or sometimes accessible though they shouldn't be. And that all had to be manually configured. And that's something where I would say not the FreeBSD community, but the Samba community to interface with LDAP should look into whether that can be optimized to some degree. So that's possibly another area where improvements can be made. But in general, we're very, very happy with what we've seen. And I think we would make the exact same choice again, except for where we have very, very small footprint memory and a very low CPU performance, where we might have chosen a different operating system that's closer to an RTOS. Okay, I saw that there's a question somewhere. Do we have a question? Okay, so what read-write caching are we talking about? There is read-write caching for the disks, and that doesn't seem to be coming out of the box in a way that optimizes performance with regards to the DRAM size that is, in fact, available in the server for the number of users and for the frequency, the max IOPS frequency of files that are requested from the server. So the ability to configure read and write caching, I think, can be optimized by making it more automatic, or at least give the users a little bit more feedback that the settings are not optimized, because usually the servers today come with a fairly large memory array. I mean, we're running most of our servers with anywhere between 256 and 512 gigabytes. So, most of that is unused if you don't configure caching. So that's something that could be optimized. The OS that we are using for our small memory footprint systems, that's at this point in time yet to be determined. We are using a very, very stripped down version of FreeBSD, but we're looking at alternatives for those very, very small footprint systems. And the memory footprint there is, believe it or not, most customers ask us to squeeze it into everything, including their applications, into roughly gigabytes. So they don't want to spend any more than 1 gigabyte's worth of memory on the footprint for the entire embedded system, plus their apps, plus all of the temporary data that they need to deal with. So that's roughly the memory footprint that the customers are asking for. And so at this point in time, we're still, as I said, we're using a very stripped down version of FreeBSD, but we're looking at any kind of alternatives for it that are closer to either an RTOS or, maybe we think about creating something that is a single user, single thread version of FreeBSD. We don't know that yet. We're working on all kinds of alternatives. We're looking into it. I'm not sure if Linux is an alternative because of the nature of its operating system license, which is GPL. So we're looking into all kinds of alternatives. Okay, any other questions? No, I think all of those went through that. Okay. I think I was in the middle of the Active Directory. So yeah, so we're not quite sure what we either misconfigured or if there's in fact a fundamental issue between Samba LDAP and FreeBSD. We never were able to configure it properly. So if somebody in the audience is aware of this or knows what to do, ping me back. Maybe we just misconfigured it all. I don't know. But we made Linux and Mac work just fine, perfectly well, but Windows always there were some hiccups. And I'm pretty sure we can somehow circumvent that at some point in time. So, like with every deployment, once it's out in the real world, you learn something, right? So in our case, of course, we learned that we need to evaluate our needs earlier, particularly for the very small memory footprint systems. So clearly, I don't know if in the beginning customers knew any better than we did what they really wanted and what the memory footprint really needed to be. But that's something we certainly hope and hopefully will not make again as a mistake. So we'll certainly make sure that we evaluate our and our customers and possibly our customers' needs earlier, and then make a decision with regards to what we can afford and what operating system we need to run on that specific hardware. And it might very well be that we'll continue using FreeBSD even in those very small memory footprint devices. But I think we're investigating how to go towards a much smaller memory footprint RTOS. Because again, there's no need for a multi-user OS anyway in those. The other thing we learned was we either need to figure out how to find the proper experts, or we need to figure out how to integrate Active Directory and FreeBSD before we actually roll it out and use it on a company-wide basis. So that certainly was something we learned. We should have done that earlier. We should have been able to figure out how to integrate both Samba and LDAP into FreeBSD. And right now we're using an external Linux server with Samba on it, and it translates the accesses, but it doesn't always work the way we want it to. And the other thing that we found, we need to have more FreeBSD aware IT personnel on hand. And particularly in Silicon Valley, it seems to be very, very difficult. We found a very small number of experts in FreeBSD available in Silicon Valley. I don't know why that is, if Netflix absorbed all of them, or if there's somewhere a big sink where all of those FreeBSD experts end up, or they might be at NetApp and at Netflix, but we certainly didn't find many people available. So there is certainly a shortage of qualified FreeBSD aware IT in Silicon Valley. And the other thing we learned after having spent a lot of money on LLVM Clang for RISC-V, it's very high quality stuff. So both FreeBSD and LLVM Clang are of incredibly high quality. There's nothing that we found we would have to change in terms of performance and security, other than the integration of a captive operating system like Windows. And during the deployment of all of it, both internal use and for systems that ultimately go to customers, we found that the number of bugs and the vulnerabilities is just lower than for any competing solution. And we were very impressed by that. So that's another indication that the software is very robust. The developer community seems to take into account good programming practices and make sure that the performance and security is there as required by the customers and by the community. We also found the community to be very cohesive, despite the fact that it's distributed worldwide. It's very cohesive, it's very coherent, it's very driven. So we were very happy about that. And so as a result, I'm not quite sure why FreeBSD isn't used in a much more widespread fashion. So we're not quite sure. Maybe it's a lack of IT personnel that is aware of it and available to work with it. I don't know that, and I don't know the answer to that question. So maybe the community or the audience can give me some feedback and some help here, but that's something that always made me wonder. I'm not quite sure why. So, that may be a hint for the marketing of FreeBSD. Maybe things like this should be published more and say, you know what, there are users out there that like it, that for whom it works, and possibly involve Netflix and NetApp into that, because they are large-scale users of FreeBSD. And I think most people don't know that underlying Netflix and NetApp, it's all FreeBSD. So would be great to see that there's, if there's some co-marketing that could be done between Netflix and NetApp and the FreeBSD Foundation. So, but that's really all I have. And as I said, it's overwhelmingly positive, and we like it. And we're very convinced that this is something that we would use going forward, with, of course, those exceptions that have nothing to do with FreeBSD. They have much more to do with with our process of selection of the operating system at a point in time when we didn't quite really have the customer feedback yet. Well, that's really all I have for today. So if you've got any more questions, let me know. Just hammer away, and I hope I can answer them. And if not, then I'll at least take them into the archive and figure out if there's anything that my FreeBSD experts can answer that we have in-house at this point in time.
Well, thanks, Axel. I'll wait another minute or so to see if we have any more questions popped up. I know we had a few pop up during the talk itself, but you've already answered those.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions here in my
okay.
in my Q&A list.
All righty. Well, I think we thank you very much for your talk, and we'll go ahead and take our next break, and we'll be back here in a few minutes. Thanks, Axel.
Sure, absolutely. And I will get one more. So the tuning stuff. So yes, you can always reach me at axel.cloth@axiado.com. I thought my email is somewhere on this. If not, then, so it's axel, axel.kloth@axiado.com. And I'd be happy to either answer your question or then forward that to my experts, and they will answer it, either one of the two.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks again, Axel.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back from our break. Before we get started, I want to let you know that our latest edition, of the FreeBSD journal is launching today. It has articles that are focused on how folks can become contributors and kind of becoming a member of the project, things like how to write commit messages or how to participate in code reviews, how to become a contributor to the project. So it's a cool issue. Should be coming up later today. I think Anne said she might even try to get it up by the end of the next session. So keep your eye out for that issue when it comes out. Okay, so our next speaker today is Jonathan Eastgate from Simpro. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here.
Hello.
Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can hear you. You're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Apologies if I seem a little bit out of sorts. It's 3:15 in the morning here in Brisbane, Australia, and it's still 28 degrees Celsius. So very interesting sort of summer evening for us. Today, I'm going to take you through a little bit about the journey myself and my company have been on with FreeBSD over the last coming on 8 or 9 years now. Really looking forward to presenting this. I'm sure people will get a lot out of it. Let me share my screen and then we'll kick off. Okay, just checking you can see my screen. Okay, so kicking off, I'll give you a little bit of history about me and our business. So I originally started my career in IT as a founder of an ISP here in Australia and was a system administrator in a number of ISPs, including the ones I founded. I started mainly in the Slackware 1.0 Linux world, received that operating system on floppy disk from the US back in, I'm trying to remember now, but I believe it was 1995. And all of the ISPs that we were running at the time were running on a Slackware, either 1.0 or 2.0 system. I had a brief date in the sort of mid-90s with Caldera Open Linux, but unfortunately it didn't last very long because then I discovered FreeBSD. So FreeBSD I've been using since version 3.0, and that was in 1998 that I made that first switch. And the switch to FreeBSD at that time, some of you may or may not be aware, was very popular, particularly in the ISP space. So where the issues we had at an ISP level were running very large mail servers, authentication servers, and usually some sort of squid proxy to try and reduce our bandwidth usage. And all of those items created for us both a virtual memory issue and also a hellish sort of IO environment. And at the time, whilst Linux was sort of the go-to in this space, FreeBSD very quickly became popular because of its handling of virtual memory first up, but also the way it handled high IO loads. So for example, for us, the same piece of hardware in the ISP game that might have been running a mail server handling 3,000 emails a minute, under Linux, that was a maxed out machine. Potentially you could not get a terminal session up and running on it. With FreeBSD, it made a massive difference to what we were doing at the time. So that was my first journey into the FreeBSD world. And then I guess over the course of the next sort of 10 to 15 years in various roles at various companies, I used a combination of Linux and FreeBSD and often returned to FreeBSD when we got into issues. But I'm not emotional about tech choices too. So I should say, whilst I am going to sing the praises of FreeBSD today and how we're using it at Simpro, a lot of the decision-making process around operating systems for me has always been about best fit and bang for buck. So you will see, lots of positive insight from our use of FreeBSD. But again, I stress, all operating systems have their place in the world depending on what you're trying to do with them. So the company I work for, Simpro, we provide a SaaS software solution that addresses the trade services sector. So that is electricians, plumbers, fire companies, HVAC, and we're basically what you would call an operational ERP system, which means we run basically all of back of house and front of house. But the one thing we don't do is the financials or the general ledger. And that means it's a very large monolithic application. And at any point during the day, this year, we could have up to 130,000 odd users online using the system at any one time. So it's certainly a well stress tested environment, and FreeBSD is a big part of that. So where did we start? I joined Simpro in 2011, and it took me a while to sort of, I guess, get under the bonnet and work out what was going on. I joined Simpro as CTO. So whilst my role now at Simpro is COO, Chief Operating Officer, I was CTO for the business up until about a year ago, and so served in that role for almost 9 years. When I joined, it was a very small business. We had 5 devs, 1 sysadmin, about 300 clients, mainly in Australia, and 17 co-located servers that were running all of that in one data center. It was a fairly traditional LAMP stack, and it was actually using a mix of Linux distros because the sysadmin prior to my arrival basically installed the distro on the server at the time that he was having a play with, and that became the production environment, so fairly messy. They had some fairly major load and scalability issues because the way the system had been architected was basically groups of clients were just put on one server, and there was no failover, and there was no balancing, I guess, of clients across the infrastructure. And they also had a patching and upgrade nightmare. They couldn't automate any of it because they were running 2 or 3 different versions of Linux, and they also happened to be different, different stages of the life cycle in each. So you didn't necessarily have the same version of Ubuntu running from machine to machine. So what we went through was a process to assess what we needed to do to get things right. Yes, we were a small Australian SaaS company at that point, but we had grand plans, and that meant we wanted to service clients in other countries. And before we wanted to go ahead and start that process, we wanted to try and sort out our stack and our operations at the engineering level to make sure we could, start scaling into other countries, but also distribute access to the application. And that was really something that was a focus for us. There was no point, for example, trying to service clients in the UK out of a data center in Australia. It's still 400 milliseconds odd to get from the UK to Australia, so responsiveness of an application across that sort of time frame is pretty poor. So scalability and distribution was key. The next thing we wanted to address were all the performance bottlenecks we were seeing. We also wanted to make sure we had a good maintenance and upgrade path because that had been an ongoing issue. I talked around patches, etc. And we wanted to build ourselves a system that meant that we could scale horizontally over time and try and reduce the requirement on us to have maintenance windows. We also wanted to counter some what we thought might be licensing issues, particularly for those of you who know the GPL or the LGPL or the AGPL. Some of the things we were starting to see come through in those licenses were becoming concerning, particularly if you are using open source software within your SaaS application and charging for it. Now, I don't think that's necessarily become a massive issue today, but we were certainly countering for what could have been an issue. The other thing we were also assessing was, did we have the right application architecture? And I'll get to that in a little bit. And of course, we kept cost as a focus because, it's great to build out a great big system, but if it means you need 30 sysadmins to keep the thing running, then obviously that would be an issue for us as well. FYI, guys, before I go on, I'm not particularly precious. So if you want to send through any questions whilst we're talking, on something that sort of piques your interest, more than happy to answer those as we go along. So obviously we had a LAMP stack. The considerations that we were making was MySQL the right database to stick with? Should we be looking at something more like Postgres, which was starting to have a comeback? Postgres was a consideration also because we were worried about the MySQL acquisition that was happening at the time and what that meant for use of MySQL long-term and licensing. We had seen a change in a lot of the admin tools in MySQL where they had become paid versus unpaid, etc. So that was a consideration as well. The web server, we were running Apache at the time, so we compared it with Lite and Nginx. Now, let me just say, you're probably wondering where this leads to in the FreeBSD world. Well, you'll see very quickly how some of this decision-making process actually started to be very heavily influenced by the operating system. So we'll get to that in a sec. So continuing on, storage scaling. We had no storage scaling at all. We had no replication in the current setup. We were looking at how we could use either NFS or DRBD or rsync to get us some form of replication or scaling of storage. We looked at, whether we needed to include some traffic management and load balancing in the application to help us scale, particularly if we wanted to move to, say, a multi-DC setup. And then we thought about, maybe we needed to do a complete application rewrite. Now, large monolithic application, over 3 million lines of PHP code. And I cough when I say that, and I know some of you will be shuddering as well. PHP is not my preferred language. I'm a Perl programmer by trade, but the application was written in PHP way back when. So I didn't really see that as an option, particularly when we had started to build a dev team of purely PHP programs. And then the last consideration after we went through comparing all of these options was, did this mean we should look at the OS? I mean, obviously we wanted to move to one OS and the consideration was to moving to one version of Linux, and that was our plan. But as we went through evaluating the tools that we were going to run at the application layer, all of a sudden OS became important. This is a really interesting graph. Now, this is from 2013, and this is why the OS discussion became so important. So we ran a comparison on the setup we had decided to go through with from a database, web server, use of various tools on the server, and using, for example, ZFS, which we had just discovered and read some good things about. So we basically did a setup of what we had decided to go ahead with in terms of services. And then we deployed these on each of these operating systems and ran some bench tests. And it was pretty amazing what we saw. I mean, FreeBSD with ZFS was just so far off the charts, it wasn't funny. And that alone probably actually made the decision for us, but there was actually one more that really consolidated it for us. Now, I know ZFS is also available under Linux these days, and I believe performs just as well. However, we did return and run these tests in 2017, I believe it was, or 2018, to make sure we were still happy with our choices and we didn't want to make any changes. And still FreeBSD with ZFS, particularly for Postgres, makes a massive difference. Getting that read size and write size right between Postgres and ZFS just means a massive gain in performance, particularly for us where the data sets are very large. ZFS also, in turn, has addressed a security issue for us, which was around encryption of data at rest and also encryption of data in use. So that's certainly something to consider as well. But an interesting chart I thought you'd like to see there. The other thing we saw when we did this testing was just pure performance across both network and I/O. We think a lot of this, particularly at the web server level, came down to virtual memory in some cases. But basically, we saw a massive boost in requests per second that we could get on the instance. Keep in mind, all of the hardware used here was identical. The only difference was the operating system setup and the services loaded on top. The services loaded on top were also configured in exactly the same way. So the only difference here was the operating system. So you'll see here the requests per second were well and truly off the charts in comparison to the old setup. So we had achieved what we wanted there from a performance perspective. And the concurrent requests were also off the charts. So we'd certainly blown that out of the water as well. Very happy with that result. And then just looking at the application itself. So obviously the last slide more around network performance in a lot of cases. But this slide is around the application performance, particularly startup of PHP, which can be quite slow. Previous startup time used to be sort of above 100 milliseconds. Now we're running at about, I think it was about 8 milliseconds. And script execution time obviously had reduced dramatically as well. So some pretty serious performance gains we saw. So where did we end up in this stack? So we ended up on Postgres. We ended up using some memcache just for some acceleration of data between Postgres and the application itself. We ended up with Lighty as the application server. And I believe at the moment we're in the process of looking at replacing that with Nginx. We also ended up with ZFS and Unison. And you might recall a few minutes ago, I mentioned there was another consideration that really hit it out of the park for FreeBSD, and Unison was it. Because when we were looking around how we were going to scale storage and how we were going to have, and this is a really important distinction for us, we didn't require at the application layer in-time synchronization of files. What we needed was basically eventual consistency of those file systems. So as long as everything was kind of in sync within, say, 30 to 60 minutes, that was good enough for us. And because we wanted to run geographically diverse data centers, that also counted for where we lost connectivity. So the application was able to keep running even if the file systems weren't consistent from data center to data center. And it meant that we weren't putting a lot of pressure on trying to make sure we keep data centers up to date, within, 2 to 3 seconds of each other. And Unison actually addressed that. For those of you who haven't played with Unison in this sort of environment, it is a fantastic tool, particularly for syncing file systems, syncing directories, but also where you have very large groups of servers that you want eventual consistency on. You can have Unison kind of run in a chained method where it will just go around over the course of 30 minutes and ensure that all of the file systems eventually become consistent. And for us, that works perfectly because we now have, I believe, over 40 application servers with basically what we call a shared file system, but they're not linked real time. They are basically kept consistent by Unison. And it does mean that they degrade very nicely if there's an interruption to connectivity and don't affect the application running. So Unison, obviously, pretty cool for what we were doing. ZFS made all the difference to our Postgres performance. And that is, just out of the park performance we get with Postgres on ZFS. It's also been particularly reliable. So considering now we're running over 30 Postgres clusters globally. So that's multiple Postgres instances, usually front-ended by PG Pool. We have not had a single ZFS failure in the 8 years we've been running it. And that's a real testament to ZFS under Postgres. We're also running HA proxy for traffic management and some load balancing. That's fairly common. And realistically, what we're getting now versus where we were is about 4 times the performance of the application to the users. And that makes a big difference. If every page load in a SaaS application is less than sort of 200 milliseconds, that's gold. That means the application is almost as fast as using an application on the desktop, and that's what we're trying to get to. So why FreeBSD for us? A number of really good reasons you've already heard, but the consideration for us was also around the fact that FreeBSD is, it's built for server world. There is no tuning of the operating system or work on the kernel that is being done to make it support a desktop environment. And we think that's a big difference between the performance we see with particularly I/O and virtual memory under FreeBSD. That targeted approach to making sure it's the best that it can be in a server environment and is not having changes made to suit a desktop environment really leads us to believe it's probably the best contender. Well, was the best contender at the time and is still the best contender now. We're also concerned that focus in other operating systems of having the system be able to work on, desktops, tablets, TVs, removes the focus from it being a really good server environment. But it also means that it's splintered, I guess, the groups that are working on kernel versus services. And you can, I guess this also comes down to the fact that, FreeBSD is an OS, not just a kernel. And I know you've probably all heard that before, but that makes a big difference, right? If you're, 100% guaranteed that everything that's being pushed out as part of the operating system has been through that QA process from the maintainers, as averse to it being just a kernel and then everything else stacked on top, it makes a big difference. And it comes through in your reliability and uptime stats. The other big consideration for us was the upgrade process. Now, obviously, we're in a pretty poor position before we started, where we had different versions of Linux, etc. That made it hard. The timing of releases, I think, particularly, I guess, in other operating systems, there is a push to release faster and faster. The approach from FreeBSD of, a more, I guess, conservative approach to major releases certainly helps us in a business environment where we're not, having to upgrade all the time. And it means basically less maintenance, more reliability, a lesser requirement for us on sysadmin staff. And you'll see that in a sec. Config joy is a big one for me. So for Linux, one of the concerns we had was we see a lot of fragmentation of configuration under Linux, or we saw it coming through at the time. FreeBSD sticks to what the original package intended to have. So if it had one config file, it's still got one config file in FreeBSD. It hasn't been split out into 100 different config files. Apache is probably a good example of where this has happened in a number of other operating systems. And the other thing we particularly like about FreeBSD is the control we get from using syscontrol. So we basically have about 5 or 6 different models that we run FreeBSD in, and most of that model is actually driven by the syscontrol file. And the configuration we apply there, so we can make it a database specific instance versus a web server specific instance, tweak all of the variables and syscontrol to make sure that it operates best for what it's serving. The other part for us is the ports collection. Obviously, it makes installing and updating the applications and services we're running on top of the operating system a hell of a lot easier. ZFS and Unison we've talked about, so I won't cover that again. And then the other consideration that was, I guess, the final bit in the struggle for us on deciding was Linux binary support when needed. And we did have a couple of applications that did not run under FreeBSD, and there was no port. However, with binary support for Linux under FreeBSD, that meant we were able to migrate those applications to our FreeBSD installation. And then over time, we actually replaced those applications with something more suitable. But that basically gave us a halfway house for those applications. And then the final bit, performance. I mean, you saw the stats, they were pretty clear to us. I firmly believe, you know, combination of KQ and virtual memory management under FreeBSD is wholly responsible for that. And I know there's still lots of talk around why KQ is so great, but certainly in our environments and the services we're running, we see the benefits of both of those big time on a day-to-day basis. So where are we at today? And this will tell you a little bit about, you know, what's happened growth-wise, but also what it's meant for our systems. We are 80 devs strong now. If you compare that to the 5 we had, you know, at the start of this session, we only have 3 sysadmins, and that's really interesting. 3 sysadmins, 5,000 plus clients. It's actually 6,000 plus as of today. We've got 300 plus FreeBSD instances. I believe it's about 340 instances running globally across 4 data centers at the moment in production, all managed by those 3 sysadmins, and they are not highly stressed and they are not under the pump. And the way we have things set up now, we are able to scale horizontally very nice across that global data center footprint. We as a business are doing 40% growth, and that means capacity planning is a pretty important part of what we do on a day-to-day basis in engineering. And we don't need to take you know, major maintenance windows to do that. The combination of what we've done with Postgres, with HA proxy, with Unison in particular, means we are able to scale out horizontally very nicely without having to have any maintenance impacts. And, you know, the only maintenance windows now we tend to see are where they're imposed by the DC. So, you know, really a good result for us as a business. And, you know, the decisions we made 8 years ago are still living with us today, and that we have no plan at this point to even change most of what we're doing, simply because I think we got the decisions right at the time. But the operating system and the tools that it supports for us long-term give us a pretty clear insight that what we're doing now, we can scale for probably the next 5 years without any major changes. So I think for us as a business, that's pretty exciting. The fact that we, you know, have a small number of staff to administer all of this means a massive, you know, cost differential to what might have been the case otherwise. So that's it on the Simpro FreeBSD journey. Happy to take any questions, guys. I'm sure there's some stuff there that is of interest to you. So I'll keep an eye out for some questions now. I've actually got one in. How have you found the Linux binary support, and is there anything you'd like to see improved there? Well, we actually had no issues with Linux binary support. It actually helped us a great deal. We, however, do not have any Linux binaries that we use now in our environment. We actually replaced all of those to get rid of it. Is there anything I'd like to see improved there? I'm probably not the best person to ask now, considering we don't run any of those anymore. But as I said, we were very happy with that. We had no issues with it, ran very well. What configuration orchestration management are you using? Yeah, really good question. So interestingly, being a Perl programmer, at the time, very early on, there weren't a great number of tool sets around to do a lot of this orchestration. There are now, so we are using Puppet, and we are using some Jenkins as well in our business. But at the production level, a lot of the tools that handle the orchestration around bringing up instances, configuring instances, putting them into production, is actually still based on some very original Perl scripts that I wrote 8 years ago. So we actually built ourselves a bit of an orchestration system to handle bringing on new database nodes, new application servers. We are still using a lot of that today, and just slowly sticking our toe into or dipping our toe into the waters of other tools that have become available since. Next question. What are your current pain points with FreeBSD? Probably the one, I don't know that we necessarily have any current pain points. I know one pain point we had was we did have an issue in our move from FreeBSD 10 to FreeBSD 11, where the upgrade path actually was broken. And we also had an issue with HA proxy under FreeBSD 11.0, and there was an incompatibility or an issue created, I believe it was, with virtual memory and HA proxy, and we had a pretty major issue there where basically our load balancers were going offline fairly regularly. However, when it was brought to the attention of both the FreeBSD maintainers and the HA proxy maintainers on the FreeBSD list, that problem actually got addressed in less than 24 hours. So whilst it was a pain point at the time, the response was so quick that we were seriously impressed. Other pain points at the moment, I don't think we really have any. We're actually, you know, we're pretty solid at the moment. No other questions at this point.
I don't see any other ones. But thank you very much, Jonathan. It was a very interesting talk.
No problem at all, guys. More than happy to take any questions afterwards as well. I'm sure the hosts of this event will be more than happy to share my details, and more than happy for them to do so if anyone wants to do a deep dive. What version of FreeBSD are we using now? Sorry, one last question just came in. We are currently on 11, and we're in the process of upgrading to 12 at the moment. I think we're about halfway there.
All right, perfect. Thanks again, Jonathan. I'm actually going to switch to Deb for a bit to give an update before we go into our next break. So let me do that. Deb needs to turn her video on. Oh, there we go. Oh, and I have to click on the right person, even better.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very good, Deb.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, we had a little extra time here before our next break, and so I thought it would be nice to take you on a journey through our website on some of the resources that we have. Axel mentioned in his talk about how we can partner with commercial users more and promote how they use FreeBSD and just how to increase the use of FreeBSD in general. So I'm going to share my screen here, and let's see if I can find the right tab. I think this is it. Okay, so you should, I think, do you see my
Yep.
My screen now? Okay. And so I'm gonna start here. So how much time do I have, John? So I can keep, I guess I'll just
Got like 10 to 15 minutes or so.
Okay, I won't take too much time, and people could post questions too here. So here's our updated website, and what we try to do is add more helpful information on here. And so there's a couple of places where we do promote companies' uses on how they use FreeBSD. So we have our testimonial page, and we have quite a few testimonials here, and we're always adding. Here's Simpro, who actually, I'm just making sure if anyone has any problems on my end. I've heard that my camera's frozen. I see it, it looks fine to me. As I scroll down, or is that also frozen? So you can see Simpro, Jonathan from Simpro, who just gave his talk. They have a testimonial. So anyway, since this is a vendor summit, and there are more vendors here, please reach out to us. And if you haven't given us a testimonial yet, we would love to get one. And publish it here, and we do promote them on social media too. And then the other thing that I had mentioned in my talk yesterday, we just started with case studies, and we started with Mellanox, and then the Netflix one is the one we just published, and we did spend a little more time the graphics on it and stuff, and to make it a little more interesting. And so you can see how you can see in PDF format, or you can see this in sort of this book format. And we thought that this might be something we might print and hand out at conferences. And so we would love to add to our list. And if you are interested in working with us, we do have a technical writer who will work with you and have the questions to help produce a high quality and informative case study. Then if you go to up here, hopefully you can see where I click under FreeBSD project, and we have our FreeBSD resources page. And this is where we're adding more and more helpful information getting started. And so we have the FreeBSD installation guides. These are all how-to guides. So the various ways of installing FreeBSD, whether it's on a virtual machine or on your bare metal system. We also have video guides. We don't have as many of those, but we're playing around with different ways of providing content. And let's see here. Also, we've added more projects, especially since the pandemic. We've been trying to add more content here, and so some more interesting, maybe more, fun type of projects to work on, like installing Minecraft or creating a Minecraft server on FreeBSD. And if you have any ideas of how-to guides that you think would be beneficial for us to provide, also give us some suggestions too. We do have a contractor who works with us part-time who writes up most of these for us. Roller Angel's been doing workshops around the world with us and for us, and so we've taken his content and broken up his instructions and setup into two different parts. And so that's those classes have been, or workshops have been, really successful. And then we have community resources down here where we've recognized different people who put on, they have YouTube channels and they create content to promote FreeBSD. And so we've listed a few here. And if you have any other ones that you want to recommend, please also, you could add these to the question, or you could put them in the Dev Summit channel. But yeah, we can't always find all of them, and so we're always open to learning about more out there. And then finally, there's two types of, well, here we have it listed as webinars, and the FreeBSD Fridays is something that we started putting on quite a few months ago. And if you go there, you'll see our schedule of upcoming talks, or actually all the talks that we've given, and then links to the videos. So they've all been recorded, and so here you can learn about, well, hardware hacking with Raspberry Pi. That was a lot of fun with by Tom Jones, and Jails by Michael Lucas, and Cherry by Robert Watson. And so all these great, interesting, informative talks. And coming up, we have next Friday will be D-Trace by Mark Johnson. And then we have more talks that we're still trying to lock in for the rest of the year. And so this is a great way to, if you are from a company and you have employees who are interested in FreeBSD, or want to learn more about it, then these are a great introductory level talks. And then the other webinar-ish type of thing happening is from the project side, that they have office hours now every Wednesday. Well, I think it's every other Wednesday. And so you can see they started in April, and various different talks that either, I mean, so these are more like how you would expect an office hour to be. So it's very informal, and you can ask questions or follow along depending on what the topic is. So these have been great too. And if you have any suggestions for webinars or any topics that you'd like to see in our FreeBSD Friday, we're always open to hear about that. Let's see, I see one question. We have so it looks like, so we come out with the, let's see here. I assume when I click on a link and it opens up a new tab, that it's still being shared. So I'm going to make that assumption here, and someone could correct me in the chat. That if I go to our journal, that we have a testimonial section in the next issue, and that'll be early next year. And sometimes, let's see here. Here's
I
the
think
journal.
that'll be it's like 2 issues. It's like our January, February. So we have one coming out today. Then we have another one that it's the first one on for next year. We still
So the FreeBSD and research.
I don't think we list the 2021 issues yet, but it will be a January 2021 as the one that Tom was talking about. That's case studies.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay. Good. So this was our FreeBSD journal, and you can access it from our website. This is how I got to it under our work, and then FreeBSD journal, and then it took you here. And I believe this is, oh no, that's an older issue.
I need like 20 minutes and I'll get it up
yeah,
there.
It's almost there. Publish it.
It's almost there.
Ready. It's available. So, and it's free. And this is produced by a publisher. So it is something that the foundation funds, and we have foundation members who help oversee this effort of providing content. I believe John is the editor. Is that right? Chief editor? No, not editor. From the editorial team.
Yeah. I'm not an editor. Y'all are thankful that I'm not the editor. We have professional editors who know what they're doing, who edit the articles that go into the journal, not me. Thank goodness.
Right. But John does. So you're the, I can't remember the title, but you're the chief person on the editorial staff.
We have an editorial board of it's many folks. It's not just me, who kind of solicit authors and kind of brainstorm what our calendar is going to be of issue topics and so forth each year. And I do serve on that board and have since the journal started, along with several other folks. I know George helped start when we first started it. It was something that George really helped kind of drive, and I was with him from the start of that because he was kind of the first chair of the editorial board. So, but there's a group of us that work on that, and several of us meet along with folks in the foundation every year to kind of sketch out what is our annual schedule going to look like, what are the topics that the things that are going on in FreeBSD that'll be interesting to people. So it's a lot of people working to do that. And of course, we have people writing articles. It's not the editorial board or not folks. We do write articles. I have an article, I think, in this upcoming issue. But the goal is to have lots of people with that throughout the community contributing and writing articles and talking about what they're doing and how they're using FreeBSD.
So like John said, one way that I participate is in that yearly editorial board meeting that happens typically at BSD Can, which is in Ottawa, and it's typically in June. And so this year we actually did it over Zoom. But one thing I found is so we usually start the meeting at 8 p.m. And the whole reason is because the foundation has our annual board meeting that whole day. And so it gives us a little break in between going from this exhausting all-day meeting to a 2-hour editorial board meeting that night. And so it does start at late, and it usually goes from 8 till 10 p.m. And but everyone is really excited to be there, and everyone is so passionate. And the list of topics that come up for the upcoming, well, it's usually at least a year out. The topics that people come up with are always really interesting, and then we as a team come up with like what type of article should fit in those topics, and then we assign people to be in charge of, who's going to write those articles, and then we try to assign people to keep to reach out to those potential authors and then keep on top of them. And so, but the thing that's always struck me at the meeting is that passion from this editorial board, because I mean, they don't have to do this; they're all volunteers, and and most people are really tired too. And so, and maybe it's all the cookies that they provide.
I was about to say the cookies. You're omitting one of the key points of that meeting, which is that usually there's about a ratio. I don't know. We end up with like a tray of cookies at the end because we normally can't quite eat all the cookies, but
there's so many cookies you can eat in one evening. So, we did get a question come in. Are the FreeBSD Fridays recorded? And yes, they are. So you can go to that page. So John, can you help me here? So if I click on, let's see here, it's the resources. It opens a new tab, and does it stay there?
I think we see your tabs, maybe. Well, you have a FreeBSD Fridays tab open that you could switch to, I see.
Okay, so you see 3 tabs open, right? Tabs, yeah. Okay, great. So it looks like it doesn't show all the tabs open.
Yeah, just the current window, I think.
Just the ones I've opened since I've shared the screen, or those. So let's see, here's the FreeBSD Fridays. I'm going to go to the top, and you can click on, click on one, Introduction to FreeBSD, that I gave at the first session. And there it is. So you will be able to watch this. It's on YouTube.
And all of the FreeBSD Fridays, along with office hours and even like the streams from the summit today, they're all on the FreeBSD Projects YouTube channel. So like the Deb has the link right there on your screen. The FreeBSD Projects YouTube channel will have all of these as well that you can find there. So if you have a smart TV app and you want something to put you to sleep at night, maybe, you can pull up YouTube app on your TV and find talks that way. So subscribe to our channel. That way you can get more cool stuff on your TV.
Right. And it's really, we're trying to, the foundation, as well as the project and the community, are trying to provide more content to reach out to people around the world. And so that's why we're really interested in hearing from you on what kind of content would be valuable and interesting to you, so that we could help provide that. Or someone from the community may be interested in doing that. So, and I think it's fun for certain people who are stuck at home, sort of an outlet to the world. So I think that's really all I have. Well, I can take you here toward our donate page and just remind you that we're 100% funded by donations. And we are in the US, we tend to get into fundraising season at the end of the year. And I think it all is because it is a tax write-off, typically for US citizens. And so I'm sure that that's why it revolves around there. But we are kicking off our fundraising season. We do fundraise throughout the year, and you can look at our fundraising page at who's donated so far. But I'd like to ask everyone to consider making a donation to us to help us with our efforts for next year. And I did go over or list some of those things that we're working on for next year. So I don't see any other questions, and I can't think of anything else to share here. So I don't know if we have something else we'd like to talk about. Anyone else who's on the panel here? I'm trying to stop my share, but I think it's delayed. So am I still frozen?
Yeah, you might be frozen.
Could be the weather here.
It's all right. I think if we don't have any questions, we can probably go into our next break. And our next talk coming up after the break will be our last vendor talk of the day from Clara at 10:20, well, 10:20 Pacific time. I know we have folks from all sorts of time zones on. So if we want, we'll take our last break for the day, and not next to last break for the day. And we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Getting ready for our next talk here. We have Sabina and Alan to talk about Clara. So I will let them get started and I will get out of the way.
Good morning, good evening, depending on whatever the time zone might be. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Sabina, and together with Alan, we will shamelessly do some self-promotion this morning, evening, whatever it is. We'll talk a bit about how we got started, about how we got to be where we are today, where and what are we in and with the community, and a few fireside stories about how our first few years were. If you have any questions, please in the chat or however the webinar works, please go ahead. Alan, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. And since you answered, I'm guessing also everybody hears me well.
Yes.
Okay. So the things that we go through, just who we are and how we started. We're obviously in COVID times. We're trying not to waste a good opportunity of still interacting during these conferences, which is also why I said, if you have any questions, please go ahead. What do we do? So a bit about our projects and then the story time that I promised. Very, very short, because I heard that in some of the side chats, the question is, where do we find a FreeBSD expert? And since ZFS is also right next to it, I'm gonna bundle the two of them in one. Here, you find them here. You find them with Clara. We do our best to work with our customers as if they're our partners. So you don't outsource to us, you work together with us. But more on this later. But how did it start? Of course, as most small companies start, we were in a bar in Tokyo. I blame Asia BSDCon for this. I am very happy to blame Asia BSDCon for this, even more so if I start to think that I wasn't supposed to be there and I accidentally ended up in the bar where Alan was. And then I ended up in a very intricate conversation about the art of FreeBSD services. The problem had been, and I think Alan is a far more appropriate person to talk about this, there has been a long time without a reliable way to get FreeBSD and ZFS services from the community, apart from contacting somebody that you know, to ask for a friend, to ask for feedback. So I know Alan had an idea to do this before. I was just crazy enough to write a mail after this trip in Tokyo to say, hey, are you still serious? Do you still want to do this? And here you are, it's 2020, there's a COVID pandemic, and we still have this going. Alan, do you have a different recollection of this memory?
No, it was, like we heard earlier today and yesterday in the vendor summit, a lot of times vendors are like, we just don't know who we should reach out to when we need help with FreeBSD. And, it has all the tools we need and it's great, but sometimes we could use a little expertise. And I'm like, well, if FreeBSD wants to be taken seriously going forward, it needs to solve this problem. And nobody else has done it. So it looks like it's on us to do that.
So by June 2018, we ended up being incorporated in Canada because it was just easier and already had our first 3 customers. Now it's 2020 and we have more than 30 such customers, and it wouldn't have happened with literally everybody's support. This is 100% a team effort, an open source team effort, and yeah, we got help from all directions. So who are we? I make a lot of noise and make a lot of trouble. I use the word management lead for one reason. It means that paperwork comes to me and not to Alan. I have a background in networking, and that's actually something that I love to do to this day. This is the very official version of what I do. Again, the actual thing that I do is put out fires. Whenever fires come up, whenever customers scream, whenever we need to sign a deal, they scream to me, and I try to make sure that the team is well taken care of. Alan is the brains of the business, so I'll let him introduce himself.
I've been using FreeBSD for a long time, and I've gotten really into ZFS and FreeBSD, and have been having a lot of fun doing that. But I'm only one person. Many people in FreeBSD know, if you have a ZFS question, you can go ask Alan, but that doesn't scale. So I'm like, I need to build a team of people that can help answer these questions, because I'm not around every minute of every day to help everyone.
It's also the fact that once you build teams that scale, you can help everybody consistently. There's handover. You also get to give people what's fun to work on. So you work together with them rather than for them or whatever.
Exactly.
And now,
one of the original ideas was, in an ideal world, I would just get to work on FreeBSD with a bunch of my friends all day. And so rather than wishing it was so, let's make it so.
And the nice part is that we took that remoteness or mobility of the open source community and integrated it straight in the company. So we never had a physical office, not in the sense of big building or small building, because we don't think it's necessary. And if we would have said this in 2018, people would have gone like, what do you mean? It sounds a bit like you don't really exist. But now it's 2020, there's a pandemic and everybody's talking about the future of remote work. And I'm very proud to say we started this in 2018. So I put this on one slide just to not waste everybody's time, but our customers and our teams are spread basically across a lot of the Western side of the world. So you have people from CET all the way to BSD. That makes it very easy to work with customers and also very easy to pair, because instead of picking the person that's in the right city and at the right time, you get to pick the expert that actually works for that project. And you get to ask the team, like, would you find this fun to work on? All right, then we can set you up. It doesn't matter where you are. You don't have to fly and spend time in a hotel and so on. You just get to work on it. I mean, we do have VPNs. But we started out in Canada. The first customers were in the US. And this reminds me of the fact that just like today, we finished the presentation for one of our first customers half an hour before the actual speech that we had to give. So I think some things will never change. We grew towards Europe, surprisingly more than I had expected. And again, teams across all Western time zones. This is a reminder that we are part of the community. This is a reminder to ourselves and a reminder to the community. We are here thanks to the people in the community, to the very lovely people that trusted us, very people that said, okay, we want to give you a chance because you're trying something. And I think that's one of our core values in the end, to keep things open, to work with the people that make this community great. And as Alan said, keep friends employed on the things that are worth working on. Now, what do we do best? So sorry, you want to say something? Sorry. So what do we specialize in? What can you call us for? When it's not Ghostbusters, what else is there? There's software development, meaning anything from FreeBSD, ARM on FreeBSD, kernel. I'll come back to all of these. Then enterprise support subscription, which sounds fancy, but it's very easy. And then enterprise learning services. So what do we do when it comes to software development? We have general dev, things like kernel development, things like driver development, ZFS on Linux and OpenZFS, ARM development centered again more on FreeBSD than in general, and code uplift. How does this work? So let's say you're a customer, you're interested, and you'd like to talk to us about it. Come to us, email, call, write on the website, send a tweet, something along those lines, and we start by doing an analysis. And we try to figure out what you try to achieve and what would the best outcome of this project be. Once we're there, we start to scope it. What do you want in scope? What do you want out of scope? There are certain things that are just not in control of, so it doesn't make sense to keep them in scope. And we make you a proposal and we say, here's how much time it would take. Here's how much it would cost. And here's what the outcome would be like. And then we deliver. Now for the support services, it's a bit easier, or a bit more challenging to understand, but a bit easier to work with. Let's say you have a very, very good team of FreeBSD engineers or ZFS engineers, and you kind of know how all of this works, whether it's infrastructure or development. But sometimes you just have a question, and you'd like to be able to tap into, what companies like Cisco or Microsoft or VMware call tech support and say, hey, is this working as it's supposed to? Can you please help me out? Is this a validated way of doing it? So we do this, but we're a lot, let's say, closer to the customer than your random tech support. So you always get the right person for what you want, because we also do a customer intake in the beginning. So if we know you have a specific type of ZFS deployment, you're going to get that person because that's who's specialized on that kind of a deployment. It works in hours per month, so you can always scale up and down however you want. It works with smaller time commitments, so it's pretty easy to get into it, and especially out of it, since I know a lot of customers hate the lock-in factor.
Yeah, every customer's needs are different. Sometimes it's just, hey, I want to be able to ask questions, or we're thinking of deploying it this way. Can somebody check and make sure that's not going to cause us problems down the road? Or it's like, we filed this bug report and we're not getting enough attention on it, or could you help us get this port submitted? Or we're having this performance problem. We run our application and then it just stalls for a while and we don't know why. Can you get someone to look into it and figure out what the problem is? And then maybe that results in patches that we can get out as an errata so that you can update to 12.2p1 and the fix is there.
Basically, everything that Alan mentioned is something we've already done for a customer. So these are not situations we've never. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Now, for the learning services, this is something we're still trying out. We have a few customers using these, but we're still fleshing it out the right way. The idea started with, we think that FreeBSD knowledge is important. So I know there's a lot of documentation out there, very well written, some excellent books. Some of them which have been also written by Alan for that matter. But how can we make sure that that information is up to date on the customer side? Because obviously there needs to be commitment. So we try to do this, and we try to ask people like, would you like regular updates? Like we come and we give you a roadmap session or an implementation session. What is new? What has been uplifted? And on the other side, we also can do things like customized training. Somebody comes and says, we don't know a lot about FreeBSD and we want to do security auditing on it. Can you teach us the ins and outs, the things that we need to be able to do that kind of auditing? As I said before, okay, all of this is some very nice marketing fluff. Can you please get to the point and tell us how to get into contact with you? It's pretty easy. The slides will be made available afterwards. Email us. Go to our website because there's also plenty of information about what we do over there. We're also on Twitter. We tweet about technical things, not about puppies, and also the same on LinkedIn. Alan, your turn. I'll remove the screen share for a second so people can see.
Hi. So yeah, I guess we were going to talk a little bit about one of our first projects and how that kind of helped us get started. So very early on when we were looking at Clara, I got approached about building a very, very large ZFS deployment for a museum, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans in the US. And they wanted to upgrade their existing storage, which was using a commercial product, but in order to add another half petabyte to that, it was going to cost them a few $1 million. So they asked, what could we do with ZFS instead? So we talked about it and worked over some designs and managed to design them a very highly redundant system that had a petabyte of usable space, build that system, and then build an identical one. The idea was, because the museum is in New Orleans, there's a good chance it'll end up underwater again at some point. And so they need all 1 terabyte of that data to also exist somewhere well inland and on high ground. But you can't just send a petabyte of data over a small connection. So it was, how do we design this so that we can build it, deliver both systems to the museum, load in all of this data, and replicate it over a fast connection, then be able to move that second system offsite and be able to keep it up to date over a much more limited connection. And not only do we need to build this and have it work, but it has to keep working for years. And this is full of raw footage from interviews from veterans who aren't available anymore.
That's one of the stories about the technical implementation. But meanwhile, I want to take one of the Q&As because now I had a chance to see him. So Sean Webb asked, where did the name Clara comes from? And I think this fits nicely with the Clara first few years. So this is a side story. take 3 people, because we started with 3 people early on. We ended up being just 2 because that's just how startups go sometimes. But basically, we struggled for a good month or so trying to come up with a name. Yes, how many
had like
Star
20
Trek,
bad candidates, and like
how many
every
Star Trek things were in there? Seriously.
a lot.
I remember the Dominion was there a lot, and anything around generation and many starship names, up until we realized that probably somebody might get upset if we do that. And then
like, all the good like star names and so on were already taken, like Polaris and all this other stuff is all used many, many times over.
Turns out, if you ask engineers to name things, they're always going to write the same things, either geeky things, star things, or things nobody heard of, but it's a bad idea anyway. So we ended up with Clara because it was short enough and it sounded easy enough to remember. But of course, the domain name wasn't available, so we ended up with Clara Systems. That was also Clara Technologies, Clara whatever. So that's how we ended up with this. Now, very random side story, in Belgium, that's known as a classical music radio station. So whenever I introduce that here, they're like, oh, no, not that Clara, the other one. And surprisingly, we're not more popular than a classical music station. Anyway, back to tech stories.
Yeah. And so it was very interesting to build this system to have, you know, the other thing is the offsite version of the system had to be able to go for at least 3 months at a time with no one having physical access to it. So it had to be able to withstand multiple concurrent drive failures, because, you know, they're only going to dispatch somebody out there to replace the failed drives like once a quarter. It's not like they can send someone whenever it happens like you would with a more normal ZFS array. So there's some very interesting constraints, and the fact that, you know, it had to be able to hold a petabyte of this data, and that this data is relatively irreplaceable. You know, it's interview with people that many of whom aren't around anymore. And yeah, it was a very interesting project. And it helped us get our, you know, our feet under us and get our first big project done, and, you know, be able to keep the lights on and be able to look for more projects. Then we started.
Go ahead.
Then we started pivoting a bit more towards ZFS because we get more and more inquiries about, you know, so we have some ZFS systems and we need someone to call when it goes bad, or just, you know, every time we go to deploy some more things on it, we always wonder, you know, are we doing this the right way? And just being able to have the confidence that we called one of the experts at Clara and asked them, and they said, yeah, that's right. Or, you know, you might want to consider this extra thing, or don't forget to make sure you set the A shift or enable compression or whatever it is, so that, you know, once you make those original settings that oftentimes aren't easy to change afterwards, you know, that you can have confidence in it going forward.
I think the last 2 minutes will be about the other side of the startup, which is it hasn't been easy, and definitely this entire COVID story could have come at a better time, I'm sure, for everyone. But starting a company that focuses on hard technologies with customers that are pretty hard to find, we were pretty damn lucky that a lot of Silicon Valley relies on FreeBSD, and it also shows the strength of FreeBSD as a whole. Otherwise, I don't think we would have survived for long. Sometimes the deals took easily 2 years to happen for something like $500,000 worth of deal in the end. So if you have to wait for that to happen and then the next thing, we would have never survived. But we got lucky, and there's a brilliant market out there and wonderful people to work with. And that's how we get to where we are today. I have 2 more slides in the 1 minute that's left, which are the usual slides, as in questions, but I'm guessing the one question that was there we answered. And the last one, thanking you all for not dropping out, snoozing, or getting tired of us during the 20 minutes that we spoke. Thank you all very much.
John says we have a few more minutes still.
Yeah, you actually have until about 10:50 if you want to tell more stories, or if we have more.
Oh yes, Alan.
You're obligated. Alan, you do have time if you would like to.
I guess we can talk a little bit more of some of the other stuff that we've done. We've been helping a few vendors upstream stuff that they had locally. Especially when you're a vendor and you're working on stuff and on a tight budget, you build what works for your use case. But upstreaming that into FreeBSD usually involves having to generalize it a little bit, or just the effort of actually making it work against head and getting the reviews done and getting it committed. And so being able to have Clara deal with that and not steal time from your engineers that are busy working on the next thing that you need for your product, and you have a shipping deadline and you don't have time to deal with upstreaming it. So working on that, we've upstreamed features from a bunch of different vendors. You can see in the commit logs. We also implemented stuff that our support customers needed, getting trim support into Beehive so that FreeBSD guests running on any hypervisor will actually send trim commands to the hypervisor if it supports it, so that when you delete files in the VM, you get that space back on the host. And then also implementing the Beehive backend for that, so that if your Beehive VMs are backed by a zvol, starting with 12.2, any stuff you delete in a guest that supports trim will actually get freed on the zvol underneath. And also working on getting that to work for file-backed beehives as well. Or another customer was using the audit framework in FreeBSD, but they wanted to be able to filter the audit trail files by which jail the entries were coming from. And so we did a bunch of work to extend that audit framework, which involved working with a semi-external upstream, the OpenBSM project, getting the fixes in there, and then pulling those via contrib back into FreeBSD and making sure they went in the next release. But also when they found bugs in the audit framework, getting those fixed and MFC'd and creating errata notices so that they'll be able to continue to run a standard release, but be able to get the fixes for those. Or even just tiny things. It turns out there was a one-line fix required for the OpenCrypto dev stuff to work properly on ARMv8. I just think no one had tried it and noticed that because of a missing break statement in the switch case, it would just return not supported for every algorithm on ARMv8. And add back that one missing line from a merge conflict or whatever, and now CryptoDev works on ARMv8. Then we also had our team work on, we had a little hackathon internally, and it went pretty well. We squashed a bunch of bugs from Bugzilla. And so then I teamed up with Tom Jones to run a couple larger bugathons with the community. So we did our small one in June, but then in July and September, Tom helped us run much bigger ones with the broader community. And those have been very successful and a great way to collaborate with a bunch of people.
And I guess I will take the blame for the ARMv8 crypto thing. I had rototilled crypto stuff in head, and I wasn't able to test that one. So
it was super subtle.
Its break.
It was one missing break statement. It was super subtle. Nobody's blaming you.
I think I've had the missing break in 3 drivers now, so it's better.
Well, you blame the reviewers for that one, right?
It's hard to get reviews on really large changes.
Yes,
We've had lots of discussions about this in the past.
Yeah. So. And that's something we try to help with as well. Making sure that as we keep going, that we can try to spend some of our bandwidth on making sure that things get reviewed from our subject matter experts, like the foundation has been doing as well, to make sure that patches that people propose don't get stalled waiting for more review. Because just as we run into that same problem when we're trying to upstream stuff from customers, like we need review. Well, it's a matter of if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right? Or if we help review your thing, you owe us a favor. And so just in general, the idea behind Clara is to strengthen the community, because that strengthens the market for FreeBSD, which strengthens us, which lets us strengthen the community more. And it just keeps feedback looping as FreeBSD gets bigger and stronger. The chat room asks about the next Bugzilla hackathon. I don't know I thought Tom had planned something for November, but I forget what we had come up with.
And the entertaining part is that as of next year, we're also going to organize some Clara ones as well, which we'll announce live. Deb is asking me to answer the hiring question live. Yes, we are hiring. Sorry, I kind of mixed those two together.
Yes, so Matthias, if you want to work with us, we'd love to have more people. You can contact us with the emails we had on the other slide there, and let us know, what areas of FreeBSD you know about and which areas you're interested in, and
your motivation.
Be able to help.
We want to know why you find this fun.
Yeah, and we'll help match you up with projects. And the other thing we've been trying to do is helping you pair up with maybe mentor, has a different meaning in FreeBSD, but help you grow into those stronger roles. FreeBSD doesn't have the same level of incoming people as it used to. We're keeping our committer count up, so we're maintaining, but a lot of the ways that most of us who are here that are FreeBSD developers got into FreeBSD, those same paths don't really exist in the same way anymore. And so we need to do what we can to make sure that we have a deeper bench in all these areas. There are quite a few areas where there are only 3 or 4 people in FreeBSD that actually know the bootloader very well, or know the VM subsystem or whatever. And if we can add one more person to that by taking someone who has an interest and has started to learn about it and teaming them up with somebody, that helps a lot. Another question here is asking about ZFS development for offline block pointer rewrite. As Matt Aarons liked to say, if block pointer rewrite is added to ZFS, it's likely to be the last feature, because it will make every future feature that much more complicated and might cause things to stagnate. But we're not currently working on something like that. I think the main problem is conceptually coming up with how to do it. Offline is a bit easier, but realistically, how often can you actually take your whole pool offline for days to rewrite all the blocks? That doesn't actually seem that, even if we built it, that many people will be able to get much use out of that.
Maybe something interesting, but if you have these kinds of questions, especially deep dives into ZFS, we're organizing a number of webinars, and we can use ideas for topics or things you want to learn about, and especially join, because we talk about things like design, optimization, specific features. So the more we get input from you, what you want to hear, the easier it is for us to make the content.
So I look forward to more questions for the ZFS webinar and stuff, talking to people that want to start working for us, and also people that want to start engaging our help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry. Thank you, Sabina and Alan. I was going to do one last check on IRC for questions, but I haven't seen any more pop up. Cool.
Oh, yes. One more thing I was going to mention. If you're a vendor and you need help with the next topic, the fact that FreeBSD is going to change its repo from SVN to Git, and how that affects your workflow, then that's also something we'd be happy to help you out with. So just reach out.
Sounds good. That's a good segue into our break, I think. So as Alan mentioned, we do have one more session coming up today, which is we're going to have an update from our Git working group about FreeBSD's pending transition from Subversion to Git for our source of truth. But we have a 10-minute break coming up, so we'll take our break now, and we'll come back for our Git working group session after that. So we'll see everybody in a bit. Okay, welcome back everyone for our last session for today. So this last session, as we mentioned earlier, is going to be an update from our Git working group on FreeBSD's pending transition from Subversion to Git as our source of truth. So I'm going to turn it over to Ed. Warner will also be joining, but he had a conflict, so he'll be joining a little bit later on once the session has gotten started. And I know Ed's got a bunch of slides he's going to present, but this is a discussion session, so we really encourage people to ask questions, and we'll just try to have a group discussion about this.
Yeah, as Warren or as John says, this is a discussion session. So I have a few slides that we'll start off with to present some background, but really it's intended to be kind of interactive and sort out things that that you have an interest in. And Warner will be joining us before too long with some additional insight. So let me just find my slides and share those. Let's see. All right, so those should be up now.
Yes,
and okay. So very briefly, how did we get to where we are now? The FreeBSD project was long ago one of the early users or early open source projects to have a publicly viewable, publicly accessible version control system. And that was CVS from the beginning. Earlier BSD work, it was in VCSs that predated that, but FreeBSD itself, CVS is where things started, and up till 2006, FreeBSD was using CVS and Perforce, and there were quite a few struggles at that time. I think it was Perforce served a really important need in the project, allowing development to happen on projects that was not in the main repository. So working branches, working development and collaboration happened in Perforce, but the combination and using CVS as the main repository had quite a few troubles. And there were, even at that time, folks were discussing Git as a possible replacement. This was, around the same time that Git had just been created. At the time, it was really not suitable for the repository that FreeBSD was. The FreeBSD was a very substantial code base, and Git had a lot of trouble with our monolithic, our kernel plus userland plus toolchain, etc. monorepo. So in 2008, the FreeBSD source tree switched to Subversion, and then in 2012, the remaining two repositories, doc and ports, switched over. And after that, there were still lots of interest in using Git with FreeBSD. And so we had a ongoing, continuously updated mirror in push to GitHub that took each Subversion commit and replayed it into a Git mirror and stored it on GitHub. And a number of various workflows have been using that mirror. So downstream projects have a fork on GitHub, for example, and continue their work in there. Quite a few FreeBSD developers use the GitHub mirror as their initial repository for development, and then replay individual commits from the Git mirror into Subversion when they go to commit it to the canonical repo. And that's the way that I do my development. I have a Git, a fork of the FreeBSD GitHub project, and all of my work in progress ends up there first, and then when it's ready to commit, it gets replayed over into the Subversion repo. And there's been discussion about using Git as the canonical source of truth off and on for some time. At the, I think, 2018, I think it was, summit, I gave a talk on using Git in the FreeBSD world. We hadn't, the FreeBSD project had not yet made a committed decision to switch to Git, but there was definitely discussion about it for quite some time. And then in 2019, the previous core team did a survey of the development community and found that there was overwhelming support for migrating to Git as the canonical repo. And so here's a sort of brief overview of the conversion process. We switched from CVS to Subversion, and now we'll switch again from Subversion to Git. And in each of those conversions, we've kept all of the history from the previous VCS as the conversion is performed. And this is important for people when you want to look at history, when you want to understand why something was changed the way it was. If you're using commands like svn annotate or git blame to see where a specific line in a source file came from, and then be able to find the original commit that made that change. Each time this happens, there's a little bit of a loss of fidelity, just because different version control systems represent the metadata and aspects of certain types of operations in different ways. And so one of the very common or very apparent ways that there's a loss of fidelity is that version numbers or repository-wide revision numbers, or in the case of Git, the commit hash, it's a new kind of namespace for commits each time. And so if you look at the history in the Git conversion, you'll see references in commit messages to CVS versions in very old history, and then you'll see references to revision numbers, SVN revision numbers, in less old history. And so it'll be, commit messages with things like fixed a bug introduced first in revision R12345, and so those sorts of things. They're a little annoying at first, but eventually, as time moves on, they become less relevant, and it's possible for us to have a mapping file or some sort of cross-reference so that we can translate from one to the other. It turns out that, very shortly after the conversion, this is a somewhat annoying issue, but in short order, it becomes something that that really doesn't cause much concern. So we've had a Subversion to Git mirror running in GitHub for quite some time right now. It's at the URL that's linked there. There are quite a few issues with vendor branches specifically in that conversion. There's also some commits in that conversion that have incorrect metadata. For the details of why the metadata is broken are particularly interesting, but in the process of getting between the original commit and then a Subversion mirror and then the conversion tool and then the GitHub repository, there were a few things in the past that went wrong, and so there's commits that have the wrong author or the wrong commit date. Those, if it was only a few of those things, we would just live with it. We would just say we've have a little quirk in the history, but we can just make note of it and accept it. But the problems with missing metadata on vendor branches are issues that will cause grief the next time we have to do an update of that same vendor source. So as a result of that, with the migration to Git as the source of truth repository for FreeBSD, we've redone the entire conversion, and so that conversion is available right now at the cgit-beta.freebsd.org URL on the slide here. What it means is that if you currently have a fork of FreeBSD, if you've cloned the GitHub FreeBSD repository and switch to this one, the hashes won't line up. And so there's some awkward migration that needs to happen to switch from the old to the new. And we're working on fully documenting those, the techniques for migrating from old to new. The FreeBSD/gitconf/wiki link on there has some documentation right now on performing that conversion. And the mailing list reference there, the FreeBSD-Git mailing list, is the place to go for information on the process and the next steps and all of that. So if you're interested in following along as the work is happening, I would definitely suggest subscribing to that mailing list. John, do you want to comment on
I think there was one thing too we discussed, which is in our current Subversion history, we actually have some messy or incorrect history even in Subversion. Particularly when people will sometimes do a side branch in Subversion and then try to do a merge and to head from that. Sometimes Subversion does weird things. We've had files where their history wanders off into a project branch and then back into head later, and you've kind of missed interlinking commits in head and other weird things like that. My understanding is the way we've done this new conversion, we actually clean that up because of the way we treat merges into head from project branches. We do them differently now so that we now have in the new Git world, we actually have a nice clean linear history on head.
Yeah, that's true. So if you look at that gitconf repository, that contains the modified version of SVN to Git that we're using to run the conversion, and you can see the incredible effort that UQS Ulrich has put into fixing up the conversion so that it produces a very high fidelity mapping of what happened in Subversion into a sensible representation in Git. I think one of the big issues that we've had is that Subversion operates on the tree as a whole in a way that CVS didn't. I mean, the commit is monolithic across the entire tree, but you can do operations in subsets of that tree. And in fact, the way that Subversion treats or handles branches and tags is inherently a copy operation inside a single flat sort of namespace. So some of those operations, if someone say did a cherry pick or merge of a single file in the Subversion view, that causes a lot of grief in the Git world. You can't represent a merge, but also say, oh, I actually merged one file, and so we basically have to drop all of the metadata for that and say it's just a change. There aren't all that many cases of that, but each one of them causes quite a lot of grief for all the commits sort of that come before or after that, and it's really a heroic effort that that Ulrich put in to finding and fixing all of those. That said, I think that we are in very good shape with the Git conversion that's in cgit beta right now, and barring any catastrophic issues found between here and the flag day, we expect it to be we expect it to remain as it is here leading up into the flag day conversion. I would appreciate anyone who has an interest in the metadata and history, cloning that repository, having a review of what's in there, and definitely if you find any issues, report the issues that you find, so that we can, if they are sufficiently troublesome, we can address them before we have the flag day. Very briefly, some of the remaining work that needs to be done. We have commit hooks that need to be developed for the Git world. So access controls around branches, allowing or not allowing merges at various times, as well as disallowing or allowing commits that fit into our workflow model. So whether it's disallowing merge commits for ongoing regular head development, things like that. Standing up the new infrastructure for the CGit host or the final repository host and the web front end and such. And there's still a bit of documentation to be written. One item that's not in the slides here, but sort of the overall approach that we've taken as we work through this is that the workflow should be basically the same in the Git world as it is, as developers are used to with Subversion on the day of the switch. So there's lots of different workflow approaches that we can investigate or use in a Git world. But the plan is that sort of what we've called the phase one conversion is that processes that developers are used to and use today are going to map directly into a map one-to-one into the Git repository. And then we'll look at investigating changes later on. Sort of at a high level, the schedule that we're looking at from here until the Flag Day. The beta conversion was available as of May, and we've iterated on it several times since it was published. I mentioned some of the next steps that are happening this month. I expect that probably the end of this month, we will run through the actual process we're going to do for the transition itself. So take a snapshot of this final snapshot of or a consistent snapshot of the Subversion repository, run through the conversion process and experiment with that. And then middle of December, we expect that we'll be able to do the real Flag Day. So a few notes here for consumers of downstream consumers of Subversion, FreeBSD Subversion repository. As with the CVS to Subversion conversion, the repository and the SVN web will remain as read-only archives with no kind of no explicit concrete plans to retire them, at least as long as any releases that initially came from Subversion remain supported. We'll keep that infrastructure in place. And even further than that, the current plan is that existing supported releases and branches, so stable 11 and stable 12, will actually still be performed from Subversion. And Warner has implemented a mirroring script that goes in the opposite direction. So commits from stable 12 commits to Git in stable 12 will be replayed into Subversion. And in particular, when we have security updates or errata updates, they will also end up in Subversion, and all of the tooling and process that folks are used to on the supported branches will remain the way they are today. I mentioned earlier that the Subversion or the Git hashes in the repository will change with the migration to the new repo, and there's links here for documentation, or it's a bit more of a sketch of the documentation, but the process for switching from old to new. If you work in a rebase workflow, which is probably applicable more to FreeBSD developers who are staging work in progress and getting it ready to commit, it's relatively easy to transplant those, the end commits that are in a working tree or in a working repository on top of the canonical one, move them to another upstream repository. For developers using a merge workflow, which is typically going to be downstreams who have ongoing long-standing changes and keep merging FreeBSD changes into there, it is possible to have a commit that represents both that has as parents both views of the history and the ongoing work will then just transition from using the old upstream to the new upstream. And I think that's the end of the slides that I had prepared. The goal here is to have this as more of a open discussion, and Warner will hopefully join us as well before long, and we can carry on. But I think the goal here is going to be to answer questions. Oh, I see Warner is on. So
I'm here.
Excellent.
And we've got one YouTube question before we get to the Q&As in Zoom, which might be easier to answer first, which is someone asked if the fact that all the AMD64 code looks like it existed at the beginning of time because we used repo copies in CVS, if that's fixed in the Git conversion. My guess is no, because it's wrong in SVN. And so I don't know that we're too far removed from fixing that.
That is a good question. I actually had not looked.
I can look quickly. If we can go to the next question, I'll have an answer in 60 seconds.
Okay. I mean, I would be really surprised. It would mean that we would have to do archaeology in CVS and figure out how to replay SVN commits, and not like you'd have to discard SVN. I suspect that's not fixed. It's just baked into the way that when we did the CVS to SVN conversion, we didn't try to fix that. And I think we're too far removed to have a chance of fixing it when going the next step.
Yeah. And I think
it looks like I just checked out the 2.1 stable branch from the CGit beta for other reasons earlier today. It was to test the subversion stuff, mirroring stuff that I'm doing, and that's an old enough branch, it's faster. But I have it laying around and there's no AMD64 in there. So it looks like that we found an automatic way of just saying, well, yeah, that really wasn't there at the beginning of time. I don't know how Uli did that, but I think that those sorts of things have been cleaned up, but reasonable efforts were made, not heroics. You'll probably still be able to find a number of weird things because we did bad things with the CVS tree.
We did to the extent, this is what you could do with CVS, is you manually copied files because there was otherwise no way of representing the fact that you had history you wanted to kind of preserve in a way that SVN copy does. So it was best practice at the time. It's just we have smarter tools.
Yeah, it's like reading old code with go-tos in it. You know, it works, but it's not the best practice today.
Yep. All right,
yeah, I think
questions or
well, I wanted to add one thing to that our primary goal in auditing the conversion is that we want to make sure from a functional perspective that things are represented accurately so that future updates and basically things are in place to facilitate ongoing future work. We want historical things we want to represent as accurately as we can, but if there is something sort of some historical quirk that doesn't cause any issue for future work isn't going to cause us any grief, we're willing to just document it and say, yeah, it's a historical artifact, we'll leave it as is.
Yeah, one of the reasons we decided to go ahead and change the hashes and fix all these things is we were trying to do a number of things for real with the GitHub branch rather than just consume it and ingest it into projects. And we found that every time we went to do that, there were so many problems and so many errors that doing simple things like, how are we going to implement a vendor branch? It was impossible with the GitHub mirror that we have because we've played it out over so long, and there were so many bugs along the way that those bugs actively get in the way of every single time you needed to do a vendor import or do a vendor import conversion. And so we made the calculation that the pain of hashes changing was worth it for this benefit, because it's a one-time pain versus we will be stuck with this forever with the project. If we had just gone with the GitHub repo as it was. It's fine for doing day-to-day stuff. It's fine for checking out versions. But once you want to do anything more complicated and use any of the power of Git, these issues really bite you hard. And an operation that takes 10 minutes in cgit took me like 3 or 4 hours to try to extract some stuff out of the GitHub repo. So, yeah, and that's even with Ed spending a lot of time upstreaming to get different fixes for the subtree merges and stuff that he found, and just trying to do something as huge as elf tools. So, those were the motivations for that. And unfortunately, it's going to cause some pain, but there would be pain either way. And we are hoping to be with Git for a number of years and don't want to have that pain every time. I don't want to be on the hook for explaining how to get around it every time somebody wants to do a vendor import for the 150 odd vendor branches we have. So that was the trade-off there.
I think looking at the questions, maybe we'll take them in the order of easiest to answer and shortest to answer first, and then build up to the more complicated questions. So I think we should start at the bottom. Alexander asks, will subversion revision numbers or something like it continue to be written to the Git notes section for each commit? And I guess this is only about going forward commits that still originate in SVN, which would be like commits to stable.
I think there's two questions really here, right? There is, will we maintain, will we maintain the historical notes? Will Git notes remain for existing commits that originally happened as a version? And I think that's a very clear, there's no reason that would get removed. I think there's a related question that's more interesting, and I think that a lot of folks are wondering about in terms of in the FreeBSD project. I think we have a long history of saying, "Oh, I fixed that in R 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." What revision are you on? And the plan is not to basically build on some aftermarket tooling that makes up a commit number and adds it as a note. We do Git does have a internally, it has a concept of a generation number, but it's not exposed. But it is also possible to count the number of commits since the beginning of the repository on a given branch in a relatively cheap manner to compute. And we add that in the uname today. So if you build out of Git today, you will actually get a commit count included in the uname, and that can act as a proxy for answering that question of, do we have this change or not? I think the other comment is that for folks that are tracking stable 11 or stable 12, via subversion, as we mentioned, Warner's tooling is going to keep replaying commits into there, and they will clearly still get a subversion number. I hope that answers that question sufficiently. And if there's anything more about it, then please just go ahead and ask.
Okay. We have several questions. Let's just start at the top, regardless of complexity. So Nick from IX asks, are there plans, and I assume he means plans for a pull request based model for Git in terms of pulling in changes?
that's probably a phase 2 feature. One of the things we wanted to do is to keep a similar workflow, and we didn't want to change all the tooling at once. So, the plans are to explore that in the future. You can submit pull requests to GitHub, GitLab, wherever, and we can bring them in more easily if we're using Git. But we wanted to we didn't want to change out Fabricator. At the same time, we changed out Subversion. So the goal of getting to Git was to replicate our current workflow, knowing that it's imperfect, knowing that it's not best practice, but also knowing that it's familiar to all our developers. And once we had that in place, and everybody was used to Git, then we could start innovating in the workflows to try to get pull requests, to try to get CI integrated, to do all these other things that Subversion, it's possible, but oh man, it's hard with Subversion, and it's much easier with Git. So that's kind of what our plans are generally in that area. Nothing specific today, but that'll be something into the first half of next year. I think we'll start to be comfortable with things and be innovating as well, maybe sooner.
Yeah, and I think one further comment on that is that even if we are not using the pull request model kind of as the primary workflow, and I think Warner, you alluded to this a little bit, but the process of someone submitting a pull request on GitHub and having us actually integrate that into the tree is much simplified with Git as the canonical source of truth, that a developer who so right now people sometimes open GitHub pull requests, and a developer, often Warner, will find that there, transplant that to Subversion, and then commit it. And so a pull request does make it in, and I think we can certainly accommodate that more easily by effectively cherry picking the pull request into the tree and then going ahead and pushing it in the Git as a canonical model.
Yeah, the eventual goal of the conversion is to have make it easier for external people to contribute. Initially, we won't get that with just the conversion. It'll be maybe a little incrementally slightly easier to pull the pull requests in. And we recognize this, and we know we need to do that longer term. And as soon as this is in and everybody's comfortable with it, and we've started getting new commits in, we'll start looking at ways that we can, leverage Git to accomplish better CI, better participation, better bug tracking, fewer patches lost and either rejected or accepted quickly. All those things that have been perennial complaints. We're hoping tooling will help, but we'll also need to help from the developer community as well. A lot of people have gotten turned off by our current tooling, so don't help. And we're hoping that the new tooling will be easier, less friction, and more people will help so we can keep up with the incoming load.
Okay, well, let's go. We have a queue of questions. Next is you almost answered it, which Christoph asked, do we have anything planned for reviews? Will Fabricator just cope? I can actually speak from my experience using Fabricator with other projects. It works just fine with Git. I know for me, what will happen is instead of having to manually replay and review once it's approved, because I already upload from Git directly, I'll just get to do a Git push. And that will be nicer, a smoother workflow, I know, for, I think, several developers. But if you guys want to say anything more towards that?
I have one little comment that the LLVM project has gone through a similar transition, and the LLVM community has a lot of parallels with the FreeBSD community, just in sort of the way that the community is structured and likes to interact and communicate and such. And so LLVM was previously on a self-hosted Subversion infrastructure using Fabricator for code reviews, and they made the transition to GitHub, not a self-hosted Git as we're discussing here, but they've actually migrated to GitHub, but they are at present still using Fabricator for code reviews, and they're still using, they use Bugzilla for bug tracking, and they're still using Bugzilla today for their bug tracking. They've basically just swapped out Subversion, self-hosted Subversion to GitHub hosted Git, and that transition worked, was quite smooth, went quite smoothly for them, and I think I expect that we will see a very similar transition.
Okay, next question I have is from Constantine, who asked, do we already have workflow policies formulated, even if only as text and not as commit hooks? And he asks a good question. I cannot imagine having merges enabled on head, for example, like only, and I think everybody is consistent that you want direct linear history on whatever your trunk is. And I think also on stable branches, we don't want craziness. But do we have any other policies besides no merge commits?
So I've written up a document on that, and I just pasted it into the Dev Summit channel. I don't know how to share it in chat on Zoom. Briefly, it says the only merge commits will be for vendor branches, but those aren't really merge commits in the sense that are problematic, because there'll be subtree merges. Everything else, there's no merge commits at all. You need to cherry pick things into stable branches, or cherry pick with squashing into stable branches. A linear history is required for pushing. We'll probably also have commit hooks that limit the size of things right now, so somebody doesn't accidentally push the entire LLVM history into our repo or something like that. The vendor stuff is something we need to flesh out and get documented. Ed has done it a few times, and I think I know what it is. And I've tried to started doing it once and got sidetracked. But those will be the only places where there'll be a merge commit, but it won't be the kind of problematic merge commits. It'll still be a linear history that you'll see in the repository.
Okay, and then our next question, also from Constantine, says, why not call the main branch current instead of main? And I have a fine bike shed over in my corner. But
the other thing is the thing I posted into Dev Summit and that John posted into the chat here. If anybody has any comments or whatever, we'd like to get feedback on that. As far as current versus main, we decided to use main because that's the new default for Git. And we thought that it would be easier and more, it would be easier and less confusing, I should say, for people that are looking at other tutorials on the net about Git. One of the things about Git, the reason we're using it is lots of people use it. There's lots of tutorials for the basics. We just need to document how the project uses it. And so from that perspective, we thought main would be a better choice. And I agree with John, it's a fine bike shed. Do you have anything to add to that, Ed, or do you want to pass on this?
I think you've covered it. I think, I guess the only thing I would add is that I think we have terminology in the FreeBSD project that we've long used that differed from the kind of broader open source community's terminology today, and whether that is because we were insufficiently vocal at sort of pushing our terminology early on, or the reason doesn't really matter. I think we are one player in a very large open source development community, and it's beneficial for us to use the same terminology that everyone is going to be using.
Also, we may be able to change it in the future. Git branches are just labels, and you just put a new label on it.
This is true.
You know, you'll be fine. Just change it in the future. Everybody's tooling would potentially have some issues, but we have more flexibility with Git than we do with Subversion to revisit this. You know, should we decide to adopt something, whether it's current or something else, you know, whether we go to naming our stable branches LTS or something, or we keep them stable. There's been discussions of harmonizing our terminology, and also discussions about, well, our terminology makes us us, so we want to keep it. And the Git migration group has said, well, we're trying to minimize change. So phase one minimizes change and tries to adopt as many standard things as possible when there's a choice. And this was one of the choices we had, and main is the standard name now.
And it's interesting, even in Subversion, we didn't use trunk, but we didn't use current either. We used head, which was a reference back to CVS, which had an implicit head branch. It wasn't an explicit thing. It was just the implicit name. And then Git also has an implicit head, but it means a similar but more Gitty worldview of the thing. So we can't use that either, really.
Yeah, Git's notion of head is just enough like Subversion that you understand it. And so you hit one of the cases where it's different and you realize, no, you don't. and lowercase head versus uppercase head would be too confusing.
Yeah,
as well.
I would not be a fan. Well, I mean, that's my bias. I only get one vote. The last question we currently have says, from Edward Sutton says, you said communities showed they approve of a Git workflow. Was it compared from a technical standpoint? I'm actually happy to answer this because I was on the last core team when we did this survey. And I would say that the reason the community approves of a Git workflow, the developers that we surveyed, is because of their experience using Git as a technical tool. I think there are many developers who we do all of our work now in Git and only touch SVN when it's time to commit something that's been approved. And like I said earlier, for my case, all my work happens in my own Git fork that I do. And using Git as a source of truth just means I get to do a Git push instead of having to manually replay commits from Git into SVN. And so I'm not sure that it's any technical, I'm not quite sure how it would be compared differently. Everything that we were evaluating in terms of tools is always really a technical evaluation of the tools that we use. We don't pick something because we like the color. We're picking tools to use in our project because they work well for us from a technical standpoint because we're using them as tools. And you always evaluate tools in terms of how they work as the way we use them. All right, you guys want to say anything else?
One minor add-on to that. I mean, you say you use Git as your development workflow is via Git. It's the same case for me. I asked the top 10 or 15 most prolific committers over the last year, and the vast majority, I think all but 2 or so, are using Git as their are doing their development in Git first and then shuffling it over to Subversion. So I think the short answer is that almost all of the developer or very active developer community is either using Git or comfortable with Git already.
And effectively, we voted with our feet.
Yeah.
One way or another. Okay, we've got another question, which is...
And the other thing is that it was equal parts popularity and doesn't meet our needs. When we chose Subversion, it was the most popular source code control system out there by far. And in the last few years, depending on which survey you look at, you can find different knee points. But in the last few years, people have moved to Git. So everybody knows Git. Everybody has Git tutorials. There's Git tooling integrated into continuous integration and other software productivity tools. And that, it exists with Subversion, except the newer ones, or except where it doesn't work, or it's very limited, or ... And so that was another part of the thing that motivated us to move to Git, was to get better support to leverage a wider universe and a wider ecosystem. It's one of the reasons we moved to Subversion when we did. Git was still, very new, very experimental, very avant-garde when we made that switch, and Peter thought it was too big a change at the time. And the world has changed since then, and so we're moving on with that. I also have a video for some of the other reasons why we chose Git that I'll post into the different channels that we have while we're teeing up the next question.
Well,
I do think it's important that, like, tools change over time. I recall, I still have it because I don't delete my old shell scripts that I committed my own source code control for my little environment. I still have a script that parses the output of our CVS commit logs to do like CVS diff minus JJ with the 2 revisions to basically allow me to MFC a single CVS commit. And boy, was it painful. Like, I mean, the face I had it automated so I could effectively merge a chain set. But when we moved to Subversion and SVN merge minus C was a thing, that opened up a lot of new possibilities. I know one of the things I did several years ago, not long after we switched to Subversion, is I merged all the super pages support back to some stable branch. And that was impossible in the CVS world. It was like, I think it was an SVN merge of eventually like 30 or 40 commits that turned into one giant squash commit into stable. And you could do that in Subversion with merge info and stuff. There was no way you could have ever figured that out and kind of rooted out what you need to do in CVS to do it. And I do think there are some quality of life improvements when using Git that are going to also enable certain things that just right now are not super easy to do in Subversion in the same way. So I do think, yes, there are trade-offs, and there might be things that we lose. I know merge info may not work quite the same way in Git, is one of my little heartburns. But on balance, there's never a system where you have no trade-offs. And I think just things have moved. Tools have improved over time. We learn different things that work better for tools over time. That, now there's some feature someone has imagined and implemented, and wow, now it's a killer feature I can't live without. And once you have that, then like you don't want to use the one that doesn't have the killer feature anymore. So
yeah, I couldn't imagine going back to a world without rebase. I have dozens of in progress things, and I just rebase. I have a little script that rebases them forward, and anytime I want to pick them up, they're current, and I can do the thing, and I don't have to, which tree did I put that in? Is that system still around? All of that, all those worries are gone.
Yeah, no, rebase actually I think is very nice, and being able to have a cleaner history of what you're trying to do when you resurrect something older. So I was one of the ones who used Perforce early on to do all my side work out of CVS, because doing any kind of work branches in CVS was a nightmare. But Perforce was still very much like a merge workflow, and at some point it just gets a mess. It gets tangly. I mean, it just gets knotted up, and it's hard to untangle what you were doing and to try to keep it clean. In terms of changes that you have, and rebase workflow in Git just does work a lot cleaner for that. Definitely, that's kind of one of the quality of life improvements over something like SVN, because SVN's workflow is all merge based too.
Yeah, since I've switched to Git, I've had a huge reduction in the oops commits, and also I'll do 2 or 3 and I can test it, and I can push to another machine and test it there. With Subversion, that's harder. It's possible, but it's harder. And that also lets me curate the commits, so I can go back and, this commit fixed a stupid typo. I don't need that in the main FreeBSD history. I'll just fix the typo and it goes in de novo like that. And we still have meaningful history in FreeBSD, but I'm also able to make my commits look better and have a higher quality. And these same features will also let us, if we go to a pull request workflow, run various CI things and let people fix the CI things and fix them in a way that makes sense for their patch train, or we'll just squash it all down to one commit, or whatever is appropriate for the situation. And so that'll give us a little bit cleaner history. We've had fits and spurts of people being more or less careful with Subversion in the past, and I think this will be just kind of the next evolutionary step. We can be even more careful and do more testing before things hit the tree, and that'll mean higher quality for everybody that has to deal with the tree.
Okay, our next question that we have is from Steve Wills. Can we get the CGIT, I'm not sure y'all are pronouncing that, Can we get the current kind of beta repositories pushed to, he says reviews-dev.f.o.
Yeah, so the staging instance of the Fabricator, yeah, that would be a good idea so that we can prototype putting Fabricator reviews up for Git against the Git repo. Yeah, I think that's something that definitely Lee Wen is handling most of the work on setting up the jails and configuration for the new production instances of all the Git infrastructure, and that's something definitely that we should do.
Okay, so that's all our current questions, but I need
there's a discussion on the YouTube channel about a Git client or other tooling in the base system.
There's a bunch of discussion, actually.
Yeah.
I have too many multiple devices.
Yeah, and I think it came up already that OpenBSD's Game of Trees is a VCS that uses a Git compatible repository. I think it's very important to be clear that they are not trying to write a BSD licensed Git replacement or Git alike. It is a VCS that is designed to meet OpenBSD's needs, that uses a Git compatible repository and remote. And it's making pretty good progress. There is a FreeBSD port. There's lots of work to do still, but it's making good progress and is available in the FreeBSD ports tree. I've done a bunch of prototyping, bringing it into the FreeBSD base system in my working repository, or what I call my whip BSD, and it's. I think it will be a credible replacement for the kinds of things that people often want to use a in-tree tool for.
So the only thing to add is the timeline we have on that is probably not when we have the Flag Day, but certainly before 13 is what we're hoping for, so that the 13 tooling or the 13 release will have a in-tree client that you can use to at least check out sources. GOT is limited in a number of ways, but those limitations, aren't a huge problem. It both suffers and benefits from not being tied to the traditional Git command line and pathological I'm not, it's the Git command line is pathologically eclectic, I guess is the kindest thing I'm going to say about it. And, well, I'll say that with the back of my hand, as they say. But yeah. But so it's unclear whether the release engineer will use the Git or the GOT tooling to do the release. Probably the Git tooling, because that's what's been written and that's what's being tested now. We'll see how that evolves and see if some of the limitations it has are resolved or not. So
one other quick note on GOT. One of my co-op students working for the FreeBSD Foundation this term is prototyping capsicumization or capsizing GOT. So GOT currently uses Pledge and Unveil on OpenBSD for its sandboxing approach, and he's developing a capsized version of all the helper tools and front end.
Okay, so let's see. We actually still have about 30 minutes left, according to our schedule. I'm looking up the silly get man page generator, but that's not a productive use of time. Let me check if we have any more questions around.
I'll have to document some of those in the FAQ and see if anybody notices.
And that man page that website is great fun. Sorry, I sent it in the Zoom chat. I didn't put on IRC because you guys can use Google to find it, and it's gone around several times.
The first time I saw it, somebody posted it with a bait link. And so it's like, oh, how am I going to use this command? Because they were answering some question about how to use Git when I was first learning out. And it took me a few minutes to catch on that this was fiction, but it's worth a couple of minutes.
I do think it is fair that Git is a useful tool. The current implementation in CLI leaves things to be desired, but it is what it is. That can be said of many tools, though. Like I've used other tools that have dubious user interfaces, but are still a useful tool once you learn how to use them. Okay, we have another question. I presume all parts of the FreeBSD repository benefits in similar ways, such as docs and ports. I suspect. I mean, I can take a stab at one of these. I suspect for docs, it mostly doesn't matter because we don't really have aggressive branches or things, but being able to do work offline and then push it up and being able to get it reviewed kind of more nicely if you wanted to make sweeping changes, that's beneficial, I think, in general. But I don't know that we have enough traffic in doc that, quite frankly, it matters which version control system we use. I do know that people on ports, there's already a clone of ports in our GitHub that people do actively use to do, I think, larger term development things. And we have forks. And I think the graphics team has a fork or like a clone of the ports tree that they maintain changes in as a way to stage before pushing them up. And I think other teams
that's right.
As well. And so similar to what happens in source, I think some developers have already voted with their feet using this tool to kind of test larger changes in a way that you can't really do for a Subversion. We touched on it earlier. Ed had mentioned it in the context of he kind of passing by it. One of the things that Git will help us to do a cleaner job of is dealing with things like security updates. Right now, we have a kind of order of operations problem in that the way we build binary updates, we have to build them before we can commit things publicly. And because the way Subversion works, we can't have like a commit that is made in real but not public. So we actually have to do something where we have a manual list of patch files that get applied on top of a checkout of the original release in order to build binary updates. Moving to Git means that we can have a staged branch that is visible to the machines building binary updates and will be the real changes once they are pushed, but are not yet visible to the public until the time we want to actually release an advisory so that we can have a truer source of truth in terms of this is actually the exact source tree that you need to build against if you wanted to reproduce a release branch at a given point in time with SAs applied, as opposed to now where you would have to kind of jump through some hoops to do that because it's involves manually applying a set of patches to some random checkout. Not quite a random checkout, but still it is not as reproducible as having it really all live in source code control and be the real source of truth.
Yeah, with ports, that's a good question. I came up with an initial set of guidelines and submitted them for Port Manager, and they've been working over what exactly they want to do. One of the things that I go into in the why BSD talk as a disadvantage is Subversion preserves copies and moves, and Git infers copies and moves. And for the source tree, this is great. Our files are mostly not the same except for stuff that doesn't matter that are, tiny BS, boilerplate things. Oh, you thought this was copied from Spark 64 and it was really copied from MIPS. Well, the files are the same, so, who cares? But for the port system, all the files are almost exactly the same with just a few names changed. So the inference algorithm that the ports tree uses or that Git uses is less effective on the ports tree. And so some of the answers that I gave might not be useful when people are using it in the ports tree. So you'll see some of that back and forth on the comments on that doc I posted. The Git working group has Baptiste both set up cgit for us initially, and he's also been acting as a liaison to port manager so that we can help manage the transition. And he's been very helpful at letting us know what are the things that people are using today. With this, the GitHub mirror, as well as other things that, we need to take into account that maybe some of our worldviews are not sufficiently broad to, understand that we need from the get-go. So that's been useful as well. We anticipate the flag days will be different for each of the 3 repos. That source will convert when it's ready. Ports will convert when it's ready, probably just before a quarterly branch. So maybe either end of the year or the Q1 quarterly branch. And doc will commit whenever. It doesn't matter when doc commits. There's a few enough doc committers that we can make the changes there. I'm going to slightly disagree with you. If we convert to Git and we convert to Markdown or ASCII doc, then it becomes much easier for people to submit typos and minor corrections than it is today with Subversion and SGML. It's the combination, it's changing both things that will make it much easier because, GitHub has a built-in Markdown editor. You can go make the change, do the pull request all there. We can pull that in, get it committed. It'll be a much better workflow. So I think in the fullness of time, that'll be better. It'll take us a little while to get there as the ASCII doc or ASCII doctor and Git streams merge together to get the benefit. So.
And then we had kind of a follow-up to my ramblings about, not really ramblings, but my comments about security updates, which asking, does it mean we get the bug fix and version bumping all in one commit as the proper workflow? I think they might still be a separate commit for individual SAs, but they might all get pushed at once and kind of show up instantaneously when they become public. But my question was more about when we build things, we can build things from a given Git hash and know that it's built from the hash that is the same hash that will be public when things show up. Whereas right now, we're not able to build from a given Subversion commit for binary updates and then promise that that's going to be the commit that shows up publicly because we have to build it before the commit exists. With Git, we can have commits that exist but aren't public yet. So that's the main change there, I think. So we might have kind of hit our.
So there have been a couple of questions on IRC that I've answered on IRC, but I think might be interesting to people.
You should relay them and answer them here because it's recorded for posterity. So yes, go for it.
Someone was asking how large the FreeBSD Git history is, and I just cloned it last night to work on a bug on my Subversion mirror, and it's 1.6 gig for the .git directory, and then however big the checkout is on top of that. And that's smaller than the Linux kernel, so we're still within. The Linux kernel is the biggest repo you can ever have in Git, is kind of the rule of thumb that people have been using, because if you have anything bigger than that, then you wind up being in uncharted territory. And if it's smaller than that, the Git people have already hit it. The other thing that was asked is there a HTML Git version or Git viewer that is similar to SVN Web? And it looks like Ed has taken over the sharing and is doing a very passable job at demo. If I'll stop talking if he wants to start talking to say what he's doing.
I just brought up and screen shared the viewer running on CGIT beta. I noticed someone in the Dev Summit channel said it's responsive, and that is actually one thing that's really really nice about it. It's actually the fastest way, I think, at present to browse FreeBSD commits. It's quite good. So I think it's yes, there is one. It will remain. Once the production instances are set up, we will keep an instance of this going, and it's a convenient way to browse. So if we look at, it's very fast. What else can we do?
It's faster than SVN Web, that's for sure.
So, for example, I just clicked on the blame link, and that was
much faster
than other things we've seen. Let's go back a little bit here.
And we also plan on continuing to run SVN Web, but it's going to be basically the read-only Subversion repository that it has access to, plus the additional mirrored commits into the 2 stable branches for people to look up individual revisions and to deal with links that are there. One of the areas that would be useful is to have something that would translate the SVN Web links into the CGIT repository, but we don't need that right away. As a source of comparison, someone also asked, speaking of sizes, the Git repo is 1.6 gigabytes, and the Subversion repo that I mirrored is 6.2 gigabytes, so it's substantially smaller. I did not expect that result. I expected maybe, a little smaller, 2 gig maybe, as the SVN repo if you're mirroring the whole repo. And that's just the source repo, or the base repo. That's not ports or doc.
And it is worth pointing out, because someone else made a comment on IRC, if you clone our GitHub repository, our current GitHub mirror, it's about twice as big. But the reason it is twice as big is we actually have 2 copies of history in that repository. So every commit is twice. Once as kind of a pure Git history, and once that is suitable for use with Git SVN. And we won't have that in the future going forward. And that's why the CGIT repository is about half the size of the GitHub clone.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions that people had posed in IRC to relay. Is there anything else on YouTube?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay.
Well, we could go ahead and end if we're kind of out of things to talk about. That's fine with me. I still need to get lunch, and in the West Coast here, it is about lunchtime. So I would have no objection.
Yeah, here in Denver, it's a little past lunchtime. So
yes, it is.
I'm happy to stay as long as people want to hear from us. And as soon as they're not, if all the questions are done, I'm going to go get lunch.
Okay. I think I'm down with getting lunch. So thank you guys for this panel and answering questions. Hopefully folks have learned some things, a little better prepared for what's going to happen coming up later in the next several months. As far as the Vendor Summit, thank you everyone for coming today for our second day. We have one more day tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be an exciting, fun day because we're going to be doing kind of our future discussions and planning around 13.0 and 14.0. So please make sure to come again tomorrow, and we'll see you then. So thanks for joining us today.